So, this is the slide that nobody saw at the conference. So, I'm just gonna go over the timeline of events. So, the conference was last Saturday. So, this is the point here on the other end. So, where this timeline starts from is the diversity and inclusivity training or workshop that we had with New Visions in November. Don't worry about the January and February. This is not to scale, but I just wanted to put some sort of timeline on this timeline. So this happened in November, late November, and then the CFP was the call for proposal deadline. It was about early December. The diversity and inclusivity workshop was where I sort of got the spark of this talk, which was that we don't usually talk about humanity or empathy in the programming culture. There's quite a lot of this idea in the Elm community. So I tried to think this thing through and like came up with several instances where this comes up in the both online communities and then the tools as well. So this is what happened basically between the diversity and inclusivity workshop and me writing the proposal. Me thinking through what kind of things actually exist in this realm. That turned into, so this one. This is what I wrote for the actual call for proposals form. This is the part that was never shown to anyone besides the committee. So this is basically revealing your hand altogether. What am I going to say in the talk? Also, the description itself, which was mentioned as write it so that it could be published on the website. So that too, I like to think about the description in the way that I am just going to reveal my hand altogether. I'm going to write everything that everything that I have in my mind at that point when I'm giving the proposal. I will just write out because there's no reason for you to hold back at that time. There's no big reveal for the people who are at the conference and people who are wondering if they would like to go to the conference or who are wondering if they should accept this proposal. They want to know as much as possible. The description is basically just like a tiny novel that goes through all of my thoughts to that point. As you can see on the timeline, it was pretty much right before the deadline. And this is kind of like by design because I wanted as much time to think about it as possible. And it turned out to be a pretty coherent story. Like I read it again in January and it turned out to be like a pretty impressive piece, like if I may say so myself. I mean, go ahead and procrastinate if that's how you work. Moving on, like the year changed around here and pretty much nothing like dramatic happened during the January, except for on the last day of January, I drew up the first iteration of the slides. And I have them with me. This is the first iteration of the slides. I can actually give them out. I'll put this one piece here as well.
I ask, when did you get, like, when did you know you were going to have the presentation?
Right. That's a good question. I think it might have been like right around the turn of the year because, well, I've also mentioned that I started writing notes at that time, so probably didn't write any notes before
I
I
was just
was
going to
accepted.
check, like, did you start writing notes already before you knew you were even going to do it?
No,
But okay,
no, I didn't do any.
good, good.
Like, but yeah, you can take a look. Um, I don't know if it matters if you mess up the ordering. I still have the online copy as well. So that was the first iteration of slides. I drew them by hand, wrote some stuff on them on these separate cards, which I find helpful because then you can shuffle the content around. You can draw up a new slide to like take off two slides, replace it one, and so on, or split slides up. Obviously, you can also do that digitally, but I mean, you have your laptop or whatever in front of you anyway, so like you can read something from the screen and then write down things on the paper. So yeah, this is how I work. Yeah, so the first iteration of slides was based on these notes that I had written up to that point. So I basically just went overboard with all these ideas that I had in my mind, uh, and then started grouping them together. Some of these are just as they are in the presentation, and some of them are like dropped out entirely, like the idea of radical listening that I had in the beginning. And I don't talk about trust or ego really in the talk. But yeah, like basically, my point here is that it's never a bad idea to write notes. Like, just write everything that you can come up with. Like, I used this document here as a markdown file. Then I used Google Keep to just jot down quick notes from whatever, like I read an article and had a thought that might like somehow link to this. So I wrote that down into Google Keep and so on. And then I had this just like totally random notes section. Like there's a quote from a podcast and like at this stage, like you can just have everything in there. There's no need to pre-select what you're gonna have in the talk. And then when you write down the first iteration of the slides, you can see like how does this fit in? How do these subjects fit in into the slides? So then about a week after the last iterations and like a week before the conference, I sat down in one of the ad hoc meeting rooms here to basically rehearse from those cardboard slides. I had my speaker notes done at that point, so I usually make a separate Google Doc just for speaker notes so that no matter what the technical situation may be, I can have the notes on, let's say, a phone or a tablet. And yeah, I have like a black background, white text notes. And so that's what I wrote and rehearsed the presentation like maybe 6 to 8 times during the one day. And that also gave me some ideas. Like I dropped some slides at that point and replaced them with some other. And then finally drew up the final slides, which I also have here. And also the beautiful pens that I was using. So the final slides are like this. As you can see, maybe on the screen, I have this beautiful texture on the back. So that's one of the chairs. It's the chair that's in the ad hoc meeting room. So if we go back here, I had the same setup here. So yeah, and it's very important that there's no electric lights here. Like you couldn't get nice, even lighting with electric lights because you would have some shades from, well, your hands and stuff. So just a window and a nice fabric to take photos on. If you want to do something like this, I don't know, like how much you're inspired by this, but yeah. And then since you can kind of see through here, it's a good idea to either write and then immediately they take the photograph, or have a separate sheet to slide underneath to block out the like things that would be showing through. I'll just pass this around too. And actually, this is the timeline slide that I was showing. On that day, you basically just have to figure out if the technology works. I did. But still, the first 5 minutes of the talk, the slides were not showing up, and I had no idea for the first couple of slides, because who's looking at your, like, when you're giving a talk, you don't look behind you. But anyway, it worked out nicely. I got the slides up on this slide, which is nice, because this would have been kind of hard to explain without that. Any questions or comments?
Nice talk. About the slides and the notes, so how much was the organizers of the conference involved in the content, or looking at the slides beforehand, or adjusting how it would come out in the end?
Right. So this particular conference had a single feedback round, and that would have fallen into around here. So I had nothing to show at that point besides notes. So I didn't gain anything from that feedback round. So, I don't know how you work, but for me, a presentation really isn't up to par 1 month prior to the event. There's nothing to show at that point. But maybe it's different for you. I don't know.
Thank you for the talk. Quick question. In case of proposing the same talk to another Elm community conference, then would you consider just replicating this stuff, or would you change it? And if yes, how would you change it?
That's a good question. For now, I have never proposed a talk that has been accepted before. And that's partly due to the fact that they are usually published online anyway. I don't know, probably you could expect the people who come to conferences that most of them haven't watched every single video online, so it might still make sense to present even just with the same content. But yeah, I have no personal experience on that, so can't really answer.
Another question is, have you ever proposed and been rejected before?
Yeah, sure.
And
Sure.
does the organizers, do they share the rejection, like the reasons, proper reasoning, or they just like ignore and don't even respond, like how companies work in the interviews?
Usually it's like, thank you, but no thank you. We had plenty of nice proposals this year, and we hope we could have accepted all of them. So yeah, no
same
feedback
harshness.
really.
As a follow-up to that, though, I would say totally chase people down if they don't give you feedback. Like I do that all the time, and the follow-up tends to be pretty good.
And that's what's happening in real. I mean, the same way that well, it's out of the scope of this talk, but the same way that companies do these sort of harsh behaviors in interviews, the same way is for the conferences, I guess. But
Yep.
yeah, anyway, do you like how much detail do you put in the CFPs, and how is it different from like the description? Because in my experience, when they ask like these sort of Google forms that they ask you to like submit the talk proposal, they usually restrict it to one paragraph. But the demo that you showed from the notes, that was like multiple paragraph.
Yeah, so this particular call for proposals was like, I think it was at most 500 words. Like there's usually a limit to how much you can say. But if it's like just one paragraph, then probably there is a separate field for like explain the committee what you want to say, and that's a bigger field then. I haven't seen any CFPs that really expect you to say everything in one paragraph.
Related to the question about like doing the same talk again, have you like produced the same ideas in other formats, like after the conference writing blog posts or something similar to kind of bring it to a wider audience?
Yeah, I think I have done something like that. And yeah, that makes sense. Like some people like to watch videos and some people like to read. Like if I'm on a bus, I never watch videos. So those are different mediums. You can like come back to a text much easier than come back to a specific part of a talk. So yeah, it makes sense.
I remember during the Axel talk, you had your phone on the table and checking it. Was that your speaker's notes?
Yes. Yeah, I was supposed to have the tablet on there, but the speaker stand was like this big, which was probably also the reason why the adapter didn't work, because the cable was pulling down basically. I'm glad I was prepared to have them on different kinds of devices.
Any more questions or comments? I guess not. Thank you.
Thank you.